The connection between drinkware and glass blowers is intimate. And to know both is to understand how there is a symbiosis between the two things. Also, is to understand the weird history of some of our most famous drinks. Today, let's do the daiquiri. Hi, welcome back to the Glass Studio. My name is Davin. I'm a glass blower. Today, I think what we're gonna do is make a daiquiri glass. Now, this is probably not what you think it's gonna be. We're gonna make an actual daiquiri glass, not a giant pint glass to hold a nasty slushy. We're gonna make an actual daiquiri glass for drinking an actual classic daiquiri. And then I think we might talk about what a daiquiri is, where it came from, and kind of what I think some of the history behind that drink is. Anyway, let's get into it. Like, subscribe, the whole deal. Let's go get some hot glass. Cheers. So here we go again. For those of you new to the channel, pretty much everything that we do in glass blowing starts with a gather of glass. That's what's on the end of this blowpipe right now. Gathering just means collecting some glass. And the goal when you're doing this is to get something that is nice and even. Now when you first get it out of the furnace, it has to be constantly turned because it's about the consistency of honey. So if I stop turning, it would just drip off onto the floor. So there's this constant attempt at controlling this liquid that really just wants to be a puddle. What I'm doing there is we're setting up the gather so that we can put a bubble into it. That's done by trapping air in the blowpipe and with my thumb, and the air heats up because of the molten glass on the end. That glass is about 2,000 degrees, and because it heats up the air expands and forms a bubble. When the bubble is big enough, I stop. In this case, I want a nice thick chunk of glass in the bottom, because what we're going to make today is a stemless coupe glass. Now, if you're not familiar with the coupe glass, it's sort of like the OG champagne glass turned cocktail glass. It's the predecessor of the Margarita and of the Martini glass, believe it or not. And it is the perfect and sort of traditional vessel to serve a daiquiri in. Now, for those of you who've been on a cruise or anywhere near the Caribbean or any tropical coast, this might surprise you, because a daiquiri normally comes in a giant hurricane glass and is usually pink and slushy and kind of sweet, and supposedly you drink it on a beach underneath an umbrella or something. I don't know. But in reality, a daiquiri is the descendant of something much, much older. The daiquiri itself was invented in, the late 1800s. Accounts vary, but we're talking 1890s. But the inventor himself, or the supposed inventor, says that it was a derivative of a rum punch. Now, again, this gets confusing because if you've been anywhere near the tropics, you think a rum punch is a big fruity thing that is, again, pink. But I assure you, it is not. The original rum punch had some fruit juice in it, but really only in the sense of citrus. It was not pink, it was not tropical, other than citrusy and rummy. And that, we have the first accounts of a rum punch in the early 1600s. So we're talking 1630s or something, when a British sailor recounted a drink that was served with parts of molasses or cane sugar, rum, some kind of citrus, lime or lemon, and water with spices. And that is what a rum punch actually is. Now, there's even a rhyme for this, coming from Barbados, and it goes, 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, 4 of weak. And that is supposedly the perfect recipe for a rum punch. Now, as I've been talking, the glass has been forming. What I'm doing here is I am crafting the base of this stemless coupe glass. This is kind of a tricky maneuver because I have to get just that little triangular shaped blob of glass hot enough to form it without getting the very thin bowl hot enough to crumple. That's a tricky maneuver considering that I'm using this giant furnace that is like 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why something like this torch can come in very useful in a situation like this where you want to spot heat a particular area. Again, for those of you who are new to the channel and glass blowing, the thing that I'm heating right now, that's going to be the base. So the entire time that I'm working on it, it's sort of upside down to me, with the part closest to me being the opening, eventual opening, and the bottom being the base. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, the actual classic rum punch. So remember that rhyme, 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, 4 of weak. That becomes important later on. So let's talk about that right after we do this part. Okay, so I want to do something kind of interesting with this piece. And so I've got on the ground in front of me a bucket of water filled with nothing more than baking soda. And so what I'm doing here is I'm getting the glass really hot enough so it's moving, and I'm dunking it a couple of times in that baking soda. And when I'm done, the baking soda affects the surface of the glass by frosting it and giving it this sort of milky appearance. Also, we've sort of captured some of the crackling that happens when you immerse molten glass in water. Now, the molten glass is so hot that it doesn't crack or break apart, just the surface fractures, but the inside stays gooey, and that allows us to maintain this lovely sort of granulated, kind of rustic looking surface. I kind of want a rough look for this glass. I want a balance between elegance and sort of rustic look. So here's the part that I was talking about. We're going to do a thing called a punty. I got a blob of glass on this rod, and I break it free from the blowpipe. And now I've flipped it around so that I can start addressing the opening. So back to the rum punch. And let's go back even further. And to understand that, you have to understand a little bit about British sailing. You see, back in the day, British sailors got an allotment of beer that they were very fond of. But in warmer climates, that didn't work, which, by the way, as an aside, is where we get IPAs from. IPAs came from double hopping the beer. Hops is natural antimicrobial, and increased the alcohol content, which helped it preserve better. But in really warm climates like the tropics, it wasn't enough. And so rum became a reasonable alternative. What we're doing here is preparing to trim that length of glass to get the right amount of glass that we need to get the right size object. Oh yeah, also if you're new to the channel, you can cut glass like paper, but only if it's soft enough, which means it has to be very hot. And that's a way of trimming that rim to the size that I want. So back to our story. So up until actually the mid 1900s, I believe, British sailors in the Royal Navy were given a daily allotment of rum. In fact, early days, that kind of was part of their pay. It was part of what they were owed, part of their rations, right? They were given food, they were also given rum. Unfortunately, if you're given X amount of rum all at once, you can become pretty drunk, especially on a hot day when you've been sweating and working hard. The British Admiralty noticed this, and not being idiots, they thought to themselves, hey, what can we do about this? And so it was mandated that that rum was mixed with water to sort of even it out, and it was rationed out at multiple times throughout the day, at least according to history. On top of that, the British Navy at the time, now remember this is sailing ship days, right? Pirates and buccaneers and stuff. During that period of time, scurvy was still a thing. Now the British knew enough to know that vitamin C staved off scurvy. But they had lost sort of access to their supply of lemons, and so limes were substituted, which is why, as on another aside, British sailors were called limeys. And so they added that. They added lime to their allotment of rum and water for the day. But that tastes kind of nasty. Well, also part of their allotment for the day, sugar. They were given molasses. So what do you have if you mix molasses and rum and water and lime together? Remember our rhyme? 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, 4 of weak. What you have is essentially a rum punch. Now, they didn't call it that. It was called grog. Grog was the sailor's drink. For years and years, grog was a thing. And from grog, we get the rum punch. And from the rum punch, we get the daiquiri. Because if you think about a daiquiri's origins that come from citrus, lime, sugar, and water, the only thing that's changed in modern day era is that for us that dilution of water comes in the form of ice to make it nice and cold. Now this is critical and important, and we'll get to this in a minute when we make ourselves a classic daiquiri, because the ice changes the flavor profile of everything. It makes it colder, makes it crisper, it changes how the lime and the sugar react to each other. Okay, so there you go. A classic stemless daiquiri / coupe glass. And now, let's make ourselves a daiquiri. You're gonna need lime. You're gonna need something to cut that with, a jigger to measure things, plantation 3-star white rum, some homemade orgeat syrup, and a mixer. So, what you're gonna need is 1/2 ounce of lime juice. I like fresh lime juice. Do not use stuff that comes from the store that's not fresh lime. 1/2 ounce. Now for my sweetener, I'm using homemade orgeat. This is not a recipe that you'll find normally. Normally people are using a simple syrup, but I love what orgeat does to this drink. And then we're gonna have 2 ounces of rum. 2 ounces of white rum. You can mix in a aged rum or a dry Jamaican rum if you want. Crack some ice in there. I like to crack the ice because it increases the surface area. Shake for about 30 seconds and kind of semi-strain into your glass. I don't mind the little flecks and chips of ice that get in there, because what I think it does is I think it drastically improves the crystal crispness of this drink. And there you have it. That's my version of classic daiquiri. People are going to tell you need more lime. Trust me, you don't. This is a wonderful mix. Cheers.